Let's back to the studio now. Yes, Kofi, you have actually isolated some specific expenditure that you wanted to talk about.
Yes, Samson, it's true. I have isolated some, but even before I deal with those ones, let me attempt to look at some issues that have been raised about the non-capturing of some sources.
Three sources.
The three sources. The Auditor General, what he does is to audit the accounts that has been prepared by the various ministries, departments, and agencies. So what they capture and report is what the Auditor General will audit on. And so if you don't capture it, it becomes very difficult for the staff of the audit service to be able on their own just know that this came from here, that came from there, that came from there. And this explains why, Samson, Parliament was interested in looking into the COVID expenditure. Because Parliament will have all the information and will be able to question why this has not been captured.
But first of all, are you saying or suggesting that once the Auditor General is presented with whatever, it must go on and should not be asking questions? Because the Ministry of Finance, gave us this statement to Parliament on the COVID-19 expenditure 2020-2021 by Honorable Minister of Finance, and is dated June 2022. This is public.
Samson, he should be asking, but he didn't ask. That is the more reason why we express that fear. And our colleagues on the other side said no, they will not support that. And that the Auditor General is there to do the audit. And we cannot in Parliament presume and assume that responsibility of attempting to audit the COVID-19 funds. And so we should allow the Auditor General to do his work. These were some of the reasons why the minority, the NDC side in Parliament, said we wanted Parliament to be involved. One of the deputy speakers, I think the first deputy speaker, who was responsible for the chair on that day, actually threw out our motion. It took Mr. Speaker himself to get it readmitted and Parliament constituting a committee to go into the COVID-19 expenditures. And we've been told by Dr. Kesela Tofosen that from 7th of February this year, they will be sitting and it will be live. Ghanaians will watch and see. And some of these sources that are found in the minister's report to Parliament, but not captured in the Auditor General's report, will surely feature when Parliament begin to look into the COVID-19 expenditures. They will surely look into those three other sources that did not find space in the Auditor General's report. But even without finding space, Samson, look at the rot that is confronting us. You pick them item by item. Take, for example, that to do with even the chiefs, which is a small amount though. But Samson, can you see something? That irrespective of the size of the region and the number of paramount chiefs or traditional areas involved, it is 80,000. Irrespective of the size.
At one point, it was reported as TNTO.
And irrespective of the size of the region and the number of traditional areas and paramount chiefs involved, the amount allocated is the same, and they spent everything. How? Are you telling me that, for example, Greater Accra, they said 12 traditional councils, 80,000. Central region, 34, 80,000. Eastern region, 11, 80,000. Brongahafo has its number, 80,000. Ashanti region, 80,000. So for the workshop that It doesn't matter where they were coming from. It doesn't matter the distance. It doesn't matter the number.
What's your suspicion here?
My suspicion is that something is wrong, and that is why it's been captured as unaccounted for. There's no way you can account for such money. There's no way. How can you account for this? It's just not possible. This is some creative reporting, so you can't account. So I'm not surprised that the Auditor General has captured this as an expenditure that could not be accounted for. How are you going to account for it? Then you go in and you also find out that statutory funds that take their sources from laws of this country, like say Get Fund, you are supposed to pay a percentage of VAT that you collect to Get Fund. Now you go and take money from, say, IMF, and you are now paying a portion of that money to Get Fund. You go and take money from World Bank, and you are now paying District Assembly Common Fund from that. What type of government is this?
Maybe because of COVID, you couldn't raise the taxes.
It says what you raise is what you should pay. You are not forced to pay what you have not raised. Samson, we agree that we raise 10 cedi. Because of COVID.
You will appreciate that the question I ask is the devil advocate.
I know.
Because it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. You indicate that you raise 10 cedi. Because of COVID, you could raise only 5 cedi. It says pay a percentage of this into a fund. Why do you force yourself to go and borrow when you did not raise 10 cedi? But meanwhile, that was not what also happened. They paid according to the revenue. So where did you put that money? Clearly, it doesn't make sense. Maybe Sylvester will be able to answer this. What kind of accounting is this that their finance minister, their darling man that they themselves wanted
He's
out?
not one of them.
They wanted him out. They went there and they were told.
He just told you a while ago that he still does.
They were told stories and they accepted those stories. That's a fair comment. But you accepted the stories that the man should lead, should come and present a budget. Look. At the time they did the press conference, Samson, they knew that budget presentation was ahead of us because anytime we come for our third meeting, budget is the focus. So they knew.
Please remember we are talking COVID funds.
Yes, they knew. They knew. Samson, they knew also that IMF, the issue of IMF have been indicated and that there will be engagement. And when the NDC time we went to IMF, it wasn't the finance minister that led the process. So being told that there's budget, there's IMF, and so leave the man to be there to continue to mismanage, and you accepted it and came back. And when we were giving you opportunity, you walked out and say you wouldn't accept his removal.
Wicked opportunity.
Oh, well, so today you are still being visited with all these kind of situation. If you had worked with us by now, he would still not be there. Samson, we made matters worse. The president himself announced that there's going to be a special insurance package for frontline officers, health officers, and so on and so forth. And a certain amount of allowance will be paid, I think 150 per day, and some other, let me call it, non-taxable funds will be made available to all these persons. Only for us to have in the Auditor General Special Audit that the Ministry of Information paid itself some risk allowance other than what has been properly arranged by the government, and we were all told just because the money was there. So they found money, so let's pay allowances to ourselves.
If the fact that there's a problem in accounting, does it mean stealing or that some fraud has happened? Didn't you follow that the Ministry of Information, for example, was organizing these press conferences, series of engagement with, for COVID, as it were, updates at the ministry all the time, and officers at the Ministry of Information were also going around almost all the time, or they should be entitled.
Samson, the president told us there's a package for all these category of persons. If they were not captured, the Chief of Staff office existed for you to seek clearance. You see, the fact that there is a situation doesn't mean you should set aside every rule. It doesn't mean that every rule should be set aside and that you decide to do things just the way you want to do them. It creates room for possible embezzlement of funds that should not have. And clearly, the report shows in a number of the areas that COVID, as has been reported, to be the reason for why we found ourselves in this mess was not because of COVID itself as a disease that came around, but because of how our government handled funds that came into his hands during the COVID. That is the only reason why COVID has become a problem. It is not the disease itself that has become a problem. And that is why, Samson, you have other countries that suffered COVID that are now facing the kind of situation that we find ourselves in. And the two topics, the one we did earlier and this, they are linked. Why are we today unable to honor bonds from persons, including even Esla and Dachi? Including Esla and Dachi bonds, which is hooked or linked to a revenue mobilization of VAT, a percentage of VAT that we continue to collect. And oil, fuel, diesel, petrol, LPG that we buy every day. These are sources that are linked to these Esla PLC bonds and the Dachi bonds. So clearly COVID came, yes. But per the information that we have received now, COVID indeed brought us even more money. Samson, I told a group that I met, I said, death is something nobody wants to happen to him or in his family. But there are instances where death has resulted in revenue mobilization for the family, depending on the circumstance, where sometimes a death has occurred, a relative is lost, you end up raising like about 10 million or 100 million, let me use it as an example. You spend maybe 10 million of the 100 million in organizing the funeral and other costs. By the next year, you should not be complaining of inability to pay fee because your father has died. Because out of the death, you had 90 million. That if you had invested, appropriately, you should not be complaining about failure to pay school fees. Okay. But if you continue to mess the 90 million thinking that that situation will remain.
But certain funerals are also organized at death.
I know, but in our case, we didn't.
Okay.
COVID, we spent only about 11 billion in COVID related, and we got 10 point something billion to support other areas. Okay. If we had done it well, today, we should be smiling that when COVID came, we got Bank of Ghana to give us 10 billion.
Right.
We got World Bank to give us 5 billion. We got IMF to give us 3 billion.
Thank you.
We
now,
got this to give us this.
If you can pause there.